Their flashlight beam bent unnaturally, as if pulled by something unseen. At first, we thought it was a trick of moisture in the air. The cave breathed around us, slow, damp exhales that carried the smell of wet stone and something older, mineral and metallic. Our boots scraped softly over gravel, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the dark. The beam from my flashlight cut a narrow tunnel through the black, illuminating limestone walls that glistened like bone. "Signal's dead," Mark said behind me, tapping his phone once more out of habit. No one answered. We were conserving sound. The cave wasn't on the maps, not properly. A shallow opening discovered after a winter landslide, dismissed as a short dead end. That was the word the ranger used. Dead end. Felt wrong even then, like calling a closed-eye blind. The air pressure shifted as we moved deeper. My ears popped softly. The beam jittered over uneven walls, shadows folding and unfolding in slow motion. Water dripped somewhere ahead, each drop landing with a hollow plip that echoed longer than it should have. That was when the light bent. Not flickered, not dimmed, bent. The beam curved gently to the left, like a ribbon tugged by a lazy current. I stopped walking without realizing it, my hand tightening on the flashlight. The illuminated line on the wall bowed inward, arcing toward a darker recess. "Do you see that?" I asked. Mark leaned past my shoulder. "See what?" I tilted the light, testing the angle. The beam adjusted but still curved. No matter how I aimed it, the far end of the light refused to travel straight. It bowed toward the same point, as if gravity itself had shifted locally. "That's not..." Mark trailed off. We stood there, breathing shallowly. The darkness around the beam felt thicker now, textured, like fabric rather than empty space. The walls seemed to absorb the light faster the closer it drew to that unseen center. "Maybe dust," Mark offered, unconvincing. I stepped forward. The beam bent more sharply. It wasn't random. It wasn't refracted. It was being pulled. The soundscape changed subtly as we advanced. The dripping stopped. Our footsteps sounded softer, as if the cave floor had turned to packed soil. A low hum crept in at the edge of hearing. Not a noise exactly, more like pressure against the skull. My skin prickled. I felt watched not from any direction I could point to, but from between directions. The beam grazed a rock formation and cast a warped shadow that stretched too long, then folded back on itself. When I shifted my wrist, the shadow lagged, moving a fraction of a second after the light did. Mark swallowed. I heard it clearly. "Let's mark this spot," he said, "just in case." He pulled a strip of orange tape from his pack and tied it around a narrow stalagmite. The color looked wrong in the beam, muted, as if the cave were already learning how to dull it. We moved on. The passage narrowed, forcing us single file. The ceiling lowered until I had to hunch. The beam now curved so dramatically that it illuminated the floor ahead before touching the walls, as if whatever held it wanted us to see where to step. That thought made my stomach tighten. "Does it feel warmer?" Mark asked. It did, subtly. The damp chill gave way to something closer, heavier. The air pressed against my chest, thick with a scent like old pennies and wet leaves. The hum deepened. We reached a chamber that opened suddenly, the space vast enough that the beam couldn't find the far wall. Darkness pooled there, layered and deep. The light arced away from my hand, reaching toward the center of the chamber like a living thing straining against a leash. I tried to pull it back. My wrist trembled, not from effort, but resistance. The flashlight felt heavier, its weight increasing the closer the beam drew to whatever waited ahead. "Okay," Mark said quietly. "That's enough." As if responding to his voice, the beam shuddered. The shadows rippled. Something moved just beyond the light, not a shape but a shift. A displacement like water flowing around a submerged object. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure it would echo. The hum resolved into something patterned. A rhythm. Breathing. Not ours. The beam bent harder now, curving almost at a right angle, illuminating a section of air rather than stone. Dust motes hung there, suspended unnaturally, orbiting an invisible center. Mark backed away a step. The beam followed him. No matter where I turned, the light insisted on that point, dragging shadows with it, warping the cave's geometry. The walls appeared closer on one side, farther on the other, as if space itself were folding. "Turn it off," Mark whispered. I hesitated. The idea of total darkness felt worse than the thing pulling at the light. The beam was our only reference, our proof that the cave still obeyed some rules. "Turn it off," he repeated, sharper now. I clicked the flashlight off. Darkness slammed into us, thick and immediate. The hum surged, filling the void the light had left. The pressure in the chamber increased, squeezing my lungs, my thoughts. Something brushed past my arm. Not touch, absence. A cold gap where warmth should have been, where skin should have felt skin. I gasped. Mark swore. The hum shifted pitch, rising, eager. I flicked the flashlight back on. The beam snapped to life and tore itself from my grip. It didn't fly forward. It flowed, stretching, bending, curving into a perfect arc that disappeared into the dark center of the chamber. The flashlight itself remained in my hand, but the light no longer obeyed it. The shadows peeled away from the walls, drawn inward, collapsing toward that invisible mass. The cave groaned softly, stone flexing with a sound like settling bones. And then understanding, not spoken, not thought, felt. The light wasn't being bent. It was being tasted. Whatever lived here did not see as we did. It sensed through disruption, through the way photons curved around its presence. The beam wasn't illuminating it, it was feeding it information. Mark screamed as something tugged at his shadow, peeling it from the cave wall like wet paper. His body followed, dragged a half-step forward without leaving the ground. I ran. The beam stretched after me, obedient not to my movement but to the thing's interest. Shadows chased, distorted, overlapping in ways that hurt to look at. The orange tape we tied earlier flashed briefly in the warped light, then dulled to gray. The tunnel narrowed again, then widened, geometry losing meaning. I burst into cold night air and fell hard onto gravel, gasping. Silence. The cave entrance loomed behind me, black and unassuming. No hum, no bending light, just rock and forest and stars. Mark never came out. Rescue teams searched for days. They found the tape bleached white. They found scuffed gravel where I'd fallen. They found no trace of him inside the cave. No prints, no gear, no remains. They called it a collapse, a trick of panic. I didn't argue. Weeks later, alone in my apartment, the power flickered during a storm. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, thumb hovering over the switch. When I turned it on, the beam stretched across my hallway and curved, just slightly, toward the closed bedroom door, where the darkness felt thicker than it should. And somewhere deep inside the walls, something breathed, patient, already learning the shape of my light. The forest echoes. We had laughed all afternoon, the way friends do when the world outside a small, remote cabin doesn't exist. My sister Lila, Tom, and I had wandered into the ancient forest beyond the ridge, following a narrow deer trail that twisted beneath towering firs. Sunlight filtered through dense needles in shifting shafts, dappled light playing on the mossy floor. Birds called overhead, their cries oddly distorted, as if echoing each other too quickly. We joked about the forest's reputation. The locals said it was alive in ways you wouldn't understand. We scoffed, as city people do. Lila hooted at a particularly crooked tree, and Tom repeated her laugh in a mocking tone. I joined, and soon our voices overlapped in a tangle of playful echo. It wasn't until we stopped that I noticed something wrong. The laughter didn't die. Not entirely. It lingered behind us, rising from somewhere deeper in the trees. At first, I thought it was our own echoes, bouncing off distant trunks. But the timing was wrong. 1 second it came after us, the next it preceded us, as if the forest had learned the rhythm of our mirth and decided to anticipate it. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Lila grinned nervously. "It's just the wind, or birds, or something." Tom's voice carried unease beneath its teasing. It's echoing differently. Weird. I nodded. The laughter followed us for a full half-hour after we had stopped talking, carrying the exact inflections, the subtle stumbles of each word. Our casual joking felt brittle under its weight, like a reflection staring back with too much awareness. As we walked deeper, the forest began to shift. Shadows bent against the grain, tree trunks tilting toward us, just slightly enough to unsettle. Moss hung from branches in unnatural tangles, forming shapes that felt vaguely like faces. The trail narrowed, then curved sharply back on itself, though I remembered no such turn. We were lost. Tom tried to make a joke. Maybe the trees are listening, huh? The forest answered. The next laugh that echoed through the trees was his. But it wasn't quite him. It had a delay, a strange melodic drag, a tremor of pitch that Tom didn't have in his voice. Lila froze. It said my name, she whispered. I stopped walking. The wind had grown heavier, pressing against our backs and whispering through the leaves like a chorus of distant voices. Every footstep now seemed to be followed by a soft repetition, slightly warped, as though the forest were practicing the sound of our presence. Hours passed, though the sky suggested only minutes. The forest warped around us, subtly at first, fallen logs repositioning themselves, streams looping back impossibly, shadows leaning toward us. When we called out to one another, our voices returned distorted, delayed, in patterns none of us could predict. We tried to mark our path. Lila tied ribbons to low branches. Tom scratched marks into bark. The forest swallowed them. Next time we passed the same trees, the ribbons were dulled to gray, and the scratches seemed unfamiliar as if rewritten. By the time night fell, the forest had become a different entity entirely. Moonlight barely pierced the canopy, painting the moss in cold silver. Our own voices were no longer our own. Each whispered word was mirrored in the distance. Each laugh echoed back in tones slightly sharper or lower, faster or slower, until I couldn't tell the boundary between mimicry and reality. Tom panicked first. We need to leave. The forest's answer came as laughter, ours, but alive. Not copying, not mimicking anymore. The echoes began overlapping, independent. Layers of sound built upon each other, forming conversations we hadn't had, accusations we hadn't spoken, songs we had only hummed. We ran. The trail twisted, doubled, and sometimes disappeared entirely. Shadows reached across the path, seeming to pull branches into our way. The echoes weren't following. They were ahead of us, predicting us, anticipating the rhythm of our panic. Lila screamed when the first voice that wasn't ours answered her scream. It was higher, melodic, almost beautiful in its wrongness. The sound rippled through the trees, bouncing in impossible directions. Called our names in voices that weren't ours, mocking, practicing, learning. By the time we found a clearing, I noticed that the echoes didn't stop with our presence. They lingered, whispering in the wind, fading only when our backs were turned. The forest had remembered us, learned us. Tom collapsed onto the moss, gasping. Lila held him, trembling. I looked back toward the dense black of the trees, where the trail should have been. That's when I understood. The laughter didn't follow us. It was waiting, practicing, for the next visitors. And somewhere, deep among the twisted trunks and silent undergrowth, the forest was smiling. Hours later, when we returned to the cabin, the echoes were gone, or at least quiet. But when the night fell, and the wind moved through the ridge, I could swear I heard them. The laughter of three friends, just ahead, just behind, never ours, always watching. The forest had learned its voices, and one day I realized it might sing them back to us.